my name is Jason Caddy, and I want to welcome you here to the Pastor's Notebook, to this episode, which happens to be episode number 2. This is where we learn, where we grow, and where we go forward together in ministry and life. And if you happen to be new with us, then I'm so glad you're here. I'm praying that this is going to be a great and inspirational time, application that will come and help you as you move forward in ministry. And if you're returning, since we only had one episode before, if you've come back, then thanks for coming back, and I appreciate it. Some of you have given me feedback, and I'm very thankful for that, all right? You can find this episode of the Pastor's Network or any other episodes coming up every single Tuesday. And so if you would, I would want you to just take a minute and make sure that you subscribe, that you share, that you rate, and that you review, right? 4 things. If you subscribe, share, rate, review, that will kind of help me out. It'll help all of us out. It'll get this out to different pastors that you know, because my goal is really to help us all learn, grow, and go forward together in ministry and in life. Well, like I said, this is episode 2, and I did send episode 1 out to several of my friends and said, hey, would you just give me some feedback? Let me know what you think. And so most of them, several of them, sent something back, and they said, listen, Jason, we like the content, that's good. We like the time frame, that's great. We like the cadence that you have as you move through your content. The only thing that I got negative feedback on was the way things looked on video. So if you're listening on Spotify and you're not watching the video, that's fine. Don't worry about it. But if you happen to be on YouTube, then you can find us there as well. I'm hoping to get this on other avenues, but on Spotify and YouTube, you can find the Pastor's Notebook, and they do have video available. So what I decided to do is change things up, and you can see what I enjoy looking at. In fact, this week, my family, my wife, our 2 youngest kids, and myself are at a beach, and we are loving every minute of it. It's our favorite place to be. Well, honestly, my favorite place to be is with my family. I absolutely love each and every one of them. In fact, as we get going on this episode 2, I just want to say that is one of the big things about why I'm doing this. I love my life. I love my family. I love what God has given me. I am blessed far more than I could ever even think about being deserving. And so I'm thankful for that. On top of that, I'm thankful for the call of God on my life. I would love to share, and I will eventually share God's call on my life. I remember being on my grandmother's floor, and that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. But God has called me, and He's wanted me to share His good news with so many different people. And so I'm excited to do that, right? Now, what I know is, and I want you to know, is that life hasn't always been peachy. It hasn't always been easy. I could share some things, and once again, those things will come in time as we continue down this podcast road. But life in ministry is not always easy. That's why, as I said last week in episode 1, that the rhythms of pastoring, the rhythms of a pastoral life are different than so many other occupations or vocations or whatever word you want to use there. And so I love my life. I love the call of God on my life. I know it's not easy, but I do know that the rewards far outweigh the sacrifices. So in other words, in ways to make that make sense, let me start back in high school for just a moment, all right? Whenever I was a kid, I loved every sport, whether it was basketball, football, baseball, soccer, tennis, volleyball. If I could play it, I was in. And as I got further and further along from the very beginning all the way up into high school, basketball was my favorite. It was the favorite thing I could do. I would go outside during the winter. I would go outside during the summer, spring, fall. If I could play anywhere, that's what I wanted to do. My high school coach began to teach us the game. He didn't want us just knowing plays. He didn't want us just knowing tasks or things we had to do in order to score more points than the other team, though that's important. He wanted us to understand the game, because if you understand, then you can move through. You can find a rhythm in the game. And that's what he wanted us to be able to do. So he told us there are 3 moments that are important to every basketball game, 3 of them. The first one is the first 3 minutes of the game. That's where 2 teams get out there, the ball is thrown up, somebody tips it, and they begin to go at it. Somebody's going to set the tempo. Somebody's going to set the agenda. Somebody's going to set the most important things. And obviously he wanted us to do that. But he said, you've got to understand the first 3 minutes of the game are very important. The second most important time period in the game is the first 3 minutes of the second half. The reason is because you have just come out of the locker room. Your coach has said, listen, we got to box out number 9. We got to make sure and do some more rebounding on offense. We got to make sure that we drive the ball and pass or whatever it is. You begin to evaluate. And once you evaluated, you wanted to come out and implement, right? He said, so you got to set the tempo again. You got to set the priorities again because it's too easy to kind of get lost in the game. And so you need that moment to reorganize and drive forward. He said that the third most important moments in a basketball game are the last 3 minutes of the game. Typically, that's where the game is won or lost. Typically, that's where success is defined. Sometimes people think it's the first 3 minutes. That's important because you're setting the tempo. Maybe you think it's the first 3 minutes of the second half. It's important. You got to know that. But those last 3 minutes, that's when conditioning begins to play a part. That's when all of that stuff where you've been running and exercising and getting your heart rate up, where you've been taking free throws at the end of practice when you are dog tired and you're going, okay, I got to make these or I can't go home, whatever. He said those 3 moments, the first 3 minutes of the first half, the first 3 minutes of the second half, and the last 3 minutes of the game are the most important. So what I want to do for the next few moments is just apply that to ministry, apply that to the pastor's life, if you will. You see, some of you are in the first 3 minutes of the game, right? You're just getting started. Maybe you've been, I talked with a friend last night. They have been at their full-time place of ministry assignment for 3 weeks now. So maybe you're in your first 3 minutes of the game. You're literally getting started, and it is so important for you to begin to set the tempo of ministry, set the tempo of what's going on. And so a couple of things just to make sure you know right offhand. Number one, don't be afraid to work. Make sure that you work and work hard. I know a lot of people are going to talk about making sure that you take a rest and make sure you take a day off. And there are rhythms that you will want to employ. We'll talk about those later on down the line. But so often, sometimes people, I don't know, they can come in and go, hey, I got plenty of time. I can do whatever I want. Work hard. Let the passions of the call of God on your life lead you forward because you have the greatest message that everyone needs to hear, the message that God wants to give them life. And so find your avenues, ways that you can begin to share the good news with those who don't know Jesus and they're not in church, they're not facing things or they're facing things they're not prepared for, whatever, and say, listen, Jesus is the answer. But also, in that moment, set the tempo, follow the passion of God's call on your life to disciple those that you're journeying with, to disciple those that you're attending church with every single week. Make sure that that is going on. And then the third thing I want you to do as you begin this first 3 minutes of the game, if you will, is don't be afraid to ask for help. Find somebody. Ask some questions along the way. I know that one of the most important things you can do is to find a good mentor. Here's the deal. You probably have heard the old African proverb, right? The African proverb said something like this, that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with someone else. Make sure that you go together with someone else. When I first started out, there was a pastor that I had, and there were people that I worked with and worked alongside. And I asked questions. I was curious. I wanted to know what it was going to take for me to be the very best that I could be. I found out later, several years down the road, that people were saying that I was immature because I kept asking questions. I want you to know it's okay to ask questions. In fact, I would encourage you to ask as many questions as you can. When kids are little, right, 2, 3, and 4, people go, oh, they want to know why. They ask questions. What is this? What is this? What is this? They're learning. They're growing. Eventually, they'll grow out of that. But there's a moment in life where you've got to become the sponge and learn. And in those first 3 minutes of the game, in that first season of your life of ministry, make sure that you ask questions. Find yourself a mentor. Find someone who at least acts like they want to mentor you, or who said, hey, I'll get together, you can ask all the questions you want, whatever it is. Just make sure that you find someone to ask questions because it will make you better in the long run. All right? So that's the first 3 minutes of the game, or the first season of ministry. The second 3 minutes, right? I want to kind of talk about that for just a moment, because this is important. This is where I find myself. In fact, this is where some of you are finding yourselves right now, because it's time to evaluate the first half. It's time to look back and just to be honest with yourself. I admit that I'm not perfect. I've learned a lot, but I've learned a lot through the mistakes that I've made. And so it's time to employ some course correction. And you need to be honest with yourself. And if you don't know how to do that, because I know it's easy for me, it's probably easy for a lot of people to get focused on so many different things as they move throughout ministry, to get focused on task rather than being who God has called you to be, then ask someone to help you evaluate. If you're married, your spouse probably knows a little bit about you, right? And if you've got kids, maybe your kids are old enough that you can ask them. If you don't have that, maybe it's somebody that you're working with, or maybe somebody that you minister to, or whatever it is. Just ask them for good, honest feedback. Have them be kind, but ask for their feedback. That's really one of the reasons, just as a sidebar, why I started this podcast. It's time for me, and maybe even past time for all of us, to invest in other people. Now, I'm doing that. I'm trying to get together with some people about every other month, and I call these people. I'm doing all that I know to do, and I'm adding this to my calendar because I think it's important. See, there's enough wealth and knowledge in the years of ministry and all the things that have gone on to pass that experience on to others so that they can be even better than I was, or better than you are, whatever it may mean. There's a guy named Dave Ferguson who's a pastor. He also runs something called Exponential, and he puts it like this: the fruit of your ministry will grow on other people's trees. The reason we do this is to help other people. And so I hope and pray that that's what you're doing. Now, some of you are in the last 3 minutes of the game, right? And I'm not talking about like death or anything like that. I'm talking about when it comes to full-time ministry. And I just want you to know this. Number one, I need you. I need you. Don't forget that there are people that are watching you. Well, they're watching you in those last few moments. I had a friend of mine one time that we were sitting down to lunch, and he just began to vocalize. He said, "You know what? I wish." Now, he was at what we would consider kind of a medium-sized church. He said, "I wish I could just go find me a small church, go visit them about every other week, and go out and play golf every single day." And I thought, oh. And I got up from the table, and I got in the car, and I left the restaurant, and I said, "Lord, please don't ever let me get there. I want to make a difference. I want to be useful as long as I can be useful." So make sure that you're investing in somebody. Take them to breakfast, take them to lunch, pass on your library, whatever it is. Just make sure that you're doing what you can to invest in the people who are coming behind you. Also, if you're retired, listen, I've got a great support team here at my local church. I love every one of them. I haven't always had that from retirees. I'll just be honest. I'm not trying to downgrade anybody. It's just honesty. And there are moments I've even told my wife, I don't want to be like that whenever we retire. I want to continue to invest in those that are coming behind me. So let me just remind you what Paul said. He said, just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form the one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body. I'm part of the body. And whenever I retire, I may not be this part, right? I may change to that part, but we're still part of the body of Christ. So the quick notes look like this. What part of the game do you find yourself in? The first 3 minutes? The first 3 minutes of the second half? Or maybe even the last 3 minutes? Or maybe somewhere in between? I don't know. If it's the first 3 minutes, then I'm asking you, pleading with you, praying for you, that you let your passion for God's call lead you forward in the days ahead. If it's the second 3 minutes, evaluate, implement, and invest. Do what you can to help those coming behind you as you course correct your own ministry. And then the final 3 minutes, be someone who others are watching and saying, I want to be like that. I want to finish strong. Let them see that example. Hey, this is episode 2, and I am glad that you've tuned in to the Pastor's Notebook. I hope this episode has given some kind of perspective on the pastor's life. maybe that you haven't really thought about. And I'm also praying that it causes you to grow, maybe even evaluate, implement whatever needs to happen, and give you some steps forward as you think about what part of ministry, what part of the game that you find yourself in, regardless of which phase. Just continue to move forward. Remember that the next episode will come out next Tuesday, and once again, I'm going to ask you to subscribe, share, rate, review, because what I desire is for all of us to continue to learn, grow, and go forward in ministry and life together. My name is Jason Caddy. I'm just glad to be part of it all. And never ever forget, you are loved.